Well, continuing really, but reviewing what I've just said in the last recording, without re-listening to it. But it occurs to me now that my recording is true to form, my form, talked it through with God by way of recording it in the hope of being a blessing to you and to myself. And I find that that has good outcome. Somehow, perhaps being in analysis, especially with the constant reference in my mind to God, causes me to level out on both issues, as referred to, the dream and the suicide. I've become the student, the observer. A bit as the psychiatrist himself comes into the scene. He's there to help, he's paid to help, and he's called, it's his calling. And he keeps this professional attitude because of his experience and training. He feels that the professional way is the hope for the client. So he analyzes it and is not horrified or emotive or despairing or involved emotionally, but concerned to understand with a view to perhaps helping the client. Not just perhaps, but very much, ideally, that he may help the client. It's a noble calling, isn't it? They're vocations, aren't they? Like the teacher, the nurse, the doctor, the psychologist, the psychiatrist, perhaps the philosopher too, hopefully. I think so. Perhaps in a way, all of us. Is there anyone who really feels their mission is to make the world worse? No, we would like, of course, to be a blessing. We at times go through very bad patches where we don't wish to bless certain people whom we may have classified as enemies. That's a great shame to us when we feel they're in trouble and desperate. But we can so easily, thank God, empathize, sympathize, understand their dilemma, and would, if you like, most nobly, in our more noble moments, love to help and rescue even our enemies, especially if it resulted in them no longer being our enemies. That would be wonderful. There's something incredibly good about human nature, I think. Or perhaps you think that's just my rose-coloured glasses. You could get some same as me, you know. You may, in a somewhat cynical way, say, no, I think I'll stick with where I am, thank you. And I sigh inwardly, oh, please don't. I'm not hopeful of you being able to cope with such. And I certainly don't want another suicide further down the line. So I feel that I've come to terms with what I trust God has presented at the beginning of this day. Wow. And I haven't got out of bed yet. Oh my goodness. But I'm not in any way perturbed. I'm wide awake, very conscious. You see, it may be extremely good practice to be a good student in this conscious world that we're in, or what we call conscious anyway. We're probably deluded in that as well. Not so conscious as we think. But is that a contradiction? Could be. When all said and done, I still wish to say, love you, Dad. Thank you, Dad. But I would like to add on reflection that, or something of what is the ideal that could have happened in the, well, one is, of course, in the dream, not to have wandered into it, because in some sense my mind was so conditioned, if you like, or trained, whichever way you like to look at it, to not dwell on evil and therefore not create it in the dream. Assuming that we are in charge, it is our mind that's in charge of the dream. If it's God giving us necessary lessons, well, that's quite different. Well, if that's the situation, all is well, because obviously, in some sense, we trust our God. Or we don't have one, in effect. You know, as is the shrine, so is the worshipper. If I actually come down to closely what you worship, what you truly worship, it might be your car and your house and your status, you know, then in some sense, I know you. As is the shrine that you're at, so are you. And that's almost a tautology, because I've defined, I think it is a tautology, isn't it? I've defined you and your God as necessarily running extremely close together if you're going to love him with all your heart, soul, mind and strength. And if you're not, then, well, presumably it's just not an issue for you. You're not interested, don't want to know. Like Marshall used to be. It's just poppycock, as my dad would say. Rubbish boy. Be in a job by Monday. Which is what he said to me. Mind you, it's a historicity now. I'm sure I've emotively embroidered the event. And after all, again in his way and in his actions, wasn't he actually trying to bless his son that was in some ways so not what he had ideally wanted of a son? But in many ways I was, and he recognized that too. He was glad, for instance, that I never wore jeans. He obviously didn't think much of the casualness of young men. Yeah, very old-fashioned. Even then he was old-fashioned, really. So, if that's so with dreams, that we would either like not to wander into them or be able to steer them because we are conscious in the dream and therefore don't have a bad outcome in the dream, or it's irrelevant because God is God and both all loving and overpowering, all powerful, as where it's best to be so, then we can leave it to him anyway, whatever we think. Thank goodness he's there to put it right. And that, of course, is the least stressful belief, if you think of it, isn't it? Because, well, I leave it to him. Although the secular would definitely feel, hang on, that's a cop-out. And I would feel that, well, we'd miss a lot of reflection and drawing closer to God in that reflection. Yeah. And then, okay, that's with the dream state. What about with the waking state? Well, perhaps it's a dream, a kind of dream, where we both have consciousness of a sort and an ability to steer the dream. And thank God, our God, able to be overruling in an infinity of love. Love you, Dad. That's unquestionably the one that attracts me the most. You may think it's the least probable, but it's the more wonderful. Approaching infinity. I'm going to go for it. And perhaps you too. Why would we do that? Perhaps because we're children of God. An infinite God has children of infinite possibilities. Love you, Dad. Thank you, Dad.